Chapter 26. The Frigid Prince, Chapter 5. As the others rushed to aid their friend, Anagil began zapping their feet with his magic, encasing them up to the ankle with an ice bracer. They struggled to break their feet free but couldn't. Matthias turned to Anagil and shouted, "What the hell, man? Igor is in there, he needs our help." "The only sound that travels in or out of that darkness is what the tower wants," Anagil said. "We made our way out by following the sounds it made, now it wants us to follow them back in, only this time I don't think it will lead us out again. Igor is fine, I don't believe that was him at all, only a replica noise of him." Still struggling to break the ice around his feet, Matthias asked, "Yeah, and how do you know that, you an expert all of the sudden? We don't know what's in their end. And even if we did, what would it matter?" Anagil shouted back, interrupting him. "We can't see in there to fight whatever it is that may or may not even be in there. We'd sooner be fighting ourselves than what isn't in there at all. And if that was Igor, by the sound of that scream he'd be dead. But you're right, maybe he does need help." He then walked over to the edge of the darkness and began to craft a thin wall of ice which grew to his height, then stretched out into the dark. While he concentrated in silence, the others stayed making cracks in their icy bracers. They would be free soon. When Anagil finished, Curtis broke free of his ice bracers and ran for the dark, only to be captured again by a new set, stronger than the ones before. He shouted in frustration and turned to Anagil, "You have no right to do this." Anagil walked up to him and stared him down with his luminous sapphire eyes. Grabbing him by the neck with his free hand, he said, "In this place no one has any rights. It's what you can or cannot do." He let him go and addressed all of them now. "And if Igor isn't back by the time you have broken free from my icy bracers, then I'm moving on, with or without you. And I like you guys, I do. But I can't help you if you constantly run head first into danger." As all their eyes were on Anagil, they didn't see Igor frantically emerging from the dark. Only after he shouted joyfully, "Oh, thank all the gods I'm out of there!" did they notice him. His nose was crooked and dripping blood, but he was smiling all the same. Anagil pounded his fists together and the ice he formed shattered harmlessly into tiny pieces. The others then gathered around Igor to ask him what happened and if he was all right. Matthias fixed his nose before he began. "I'm fine now, but I tell you, being in there was beyond eerie, my goosebumps have goosebumps." He wiped the blood from his nose before continuing. "I grew hair on my head and I fell out, that's how scary that place was." "We heard you screaming in there, man, what was that about?" Yadril asked. Igor looked away embarrassed, his cheeks flushed red. "I mean, I shouted for everyone in there, but I couldn't even hear my own voice, only those damn wolves. I started following them like Anagil said, but they suddenly stopped and I was lost. I panicked and started running around. I wouldn't have found my way out if not running face first into that ice wall. I figured it was Anagil's and I followed it out of the dark." He looked over to Anagil, who was standing impatiently at the stairs waiting for them, and smiled at him and waved. Anagil gave a small wave back, even grinned, and said, "All right, can we move on now? I don't like this floor any more than you guys do." Without waiting for answer, he turned and began climbing the stairs. Matthias caught up to Anagil on the stairs while the others talked amongst themselves. "You weren't really going to leave us behind there?" Matthias asked. Anagil didn't answer. The awkward silence carried on for a while as they climbed the stairs until Matthias said, "Your ice wall is still up." "I know," Anagil said. "Plan to lead everyone through there safely. My father is still climbing. So, he's a smart man, he can figure it out." "Perhaps, but the rules changed in that floor very fast. I think you need magic to compete with magic in this place. Hopefully, after he sees how he can't make it without that edge, then he will turn around and go home. If he's anything like you, something that small won't stop him." Anagil returned to his silent demeanor after that. Coming out into the mountainous-like floor, where it felt like being outside again, was an enormous spirit lifter for all of them. The smell of fresh air, the pseudo-sunshine on their faces, even Anagil was a bit more cheery. "Now this is more like it," Yadril said, suddenly appearing next to Anagil. "We need more floors like this, and, hey wait, has your skin always been that blue?" Anagil glanced at Yadril puzzled and then looked down at his skin. Indeed, it was a light shade of blue now, before it was just very pale and white. "No, I think my magic is changing my appearance too." Yadriel grabbed his wrist and pulled back right away.
It's ice cold, man. That's freaky. Well, see ya.
He then vanished in thin air.
Right, and I'm the freaky one,
Inagil retorted. He went and found the others to regroup after that. They were scattered around a bit but kept close enough together to still see each other or hear if they shouted. As Igor was the closest one around, Inagil talked to him.
Yadriel just teleported away,
Inagil said. Igor scoffed and said,
yeah, he does that, damned fool has been teleporting into trouble as much as he has out of it.
Inagil grinned,
I believe it. Anyways, listen. Sorry about almost abandoning you on that dark floor.
Igor looked Inagil in the eyes.
Abandoning me? You saved me in there. If anything, I should be thanking you, I just didn't know how, so I didn't say anything for all this time, really.
They said nothing for a time and walked along in silence.
I think both of us were really just trying to avoid this awkward silence,
Inagil said. Igor chuckled, and Inagil joined. Matthias and Curtis soon converged with them, and Curtis asked,
hey, where has Yadriel vanished off to now?
Inagil shrugged his shoulders and said,
I don't know, this floor is rather enormous. Maybe we should shout for him, our echoes would carry into his ears, right? Yeah, his and anyone else's who is here. Still, this place is too big for us to look for him together. I think we should split. Guys, we have a serious problem,
Yadriel said, appearing in front of them all and interrupting Inagil. He was holding his left arm tightly, but Inagil could still see the maroon blood oozing out of an unknown wound.
What happened to your arm?
Matthias asked, taking notice of the blood as well. Yadriel just shook his head and said,
nah man, this is nothing but I need to take a look at it, so hold off on your story for a second.
Inagil said, interrupting him and walking over to raise his injured arm up. Yadriel flinched.
Hey man, easy with that. Suck it up.
He then moved his hand away from the wound that he was tightly clutching and tore the sleeve off his shirt. From his shoulder to bicep was a large gash that kept oozing blood. Inagil quickly tore the arm sleeve up more and grabbed Yadriel's arm to wrap the wound. Yadriel flinched again and said,
yo man, your hands are even colder than before, stings worse than this. Again, suck it up,
Inagil said as he wrapped the wound off.
This will do to stop the bleeding for now, but we will need something cleaner later on. And some fresh water to clean it out.
Yadriel scoffed and said,
ha, I survived worse than this.
Inagil gave him a look of doubt, and Igor confirmed,
yeah, he has actually.
Inagil sighed and stepped back, giving him some room to breathe and tell his story.
Alright, so there I was, sightseeing and stuff, right? Enjoying the view and everything, then I teleport to this one spot and bam! Big ugly skeletal demon fucker is there with like these scythe hands and attacks me, and I tell you it was ugly. Gave me this nasty wound here too. So I got the hell out of there and teleported up higher and see a whole fucking bunch of them, like a small army or some shit. That's when I got they.
Inagil suddenly grabbed Yadriel by the collar of his shirt and pulled him aside, hurling his lance in the process. Yadriel got up and raged at Inagil until he saw the look of fear on the others and how they all stared past him. He turned around to see a tall grey, skeletal monster with scythe-like hands frozen in place, and Inagil's ice lance sticking out of its chest. Yadriel swallowed the lump in his throat and said,
yeah, that's the one, they're one of them at least. You weren't kidding, that thing's an ugly-ass monster,
Curtis said.
More like a nightmare,
Igor remarked.
These things are stealthy and fearsome,
Inagil said, walking over to it and grabbing his ice lance.
How many did you say you saw again?
He pulled the lance out.
A small army of them,
Yadriel said. Before Inagil could turn to ask him where the thin sheet of ice coating the monster shattered, and it swung its arm at him. Inagil raised his lance in defense, blocking the swing. But the raw strength of the demon was too much, and Inagil was violently hurled like a ragdoll, smashing into one of the nearby boulders. The demon turned its sights on the other now, and Yadriel suddenly teleported behind it. He kneeled down and wrapped his good arm around its leg, and the two suddenly vanished. Seconds later, as they were wondering where Yadriel took it, Yadriel appeared in front of them, landing hard on his knees. Before they could ask what happened, the demon fell from above and landed in front of them with an earth-shaking thud. The ground had cracked all around as the demon was buried half a foot or so into the rocky ground. It was a hard fall. Yadriel got up and shouted at it,
yeah, fuck you. All that stress you gave me before, I don't even give a shit now.
He walked over to the demon and put a foot on it triumphantly. Moments later a low growl rumbled from the ground and Yadril started backing up. As the demon slowly raised itself back up to its feet, he teleported to behind his friends and said,
"Alright guys, I'm about ready to call it here and turn tail and run." "Agreed."
"Agreed," Curtis and Matthias said at the same time. As they turned to flee, Igor said,
"Wait, what about Inagil?" "I'll grab him and get us the fuck out of here,"
Yadril said. He then vanished and returned a couple seconds later with Inagil.
"Inagil, I think this is where we should stop our journey and turn back,"
Matthias said.
"We can't face these things." "I'm not done yet,"
Inagil shouted at him. He walked forward to the demon briskly. The others looked at each other, not sure what to do. As the demon had finished rising to its feet and shaking off whatever damage the fall had done, Inagil stopped before it and pointed his lance at it. It snarled at him, and in response Inagil blasted forth a beam of ice, concentrating through the spear. The demon was covered again with a coat of cobalt ice, which sparkled brilliantly in the pseudo-sun. He then jabbed his lance through its skull, and to be sure it died, he kicked it over with his foot and it broke into a dozen pieces.
"That works too,"
Yadril said.
"Yeah, but what about the others?"
Matthias asked. Inagil had already turned from and began walking further into the mountain floor.
"Hey man, that's the direction all them demons are at,"
Yadril shouted at Inagil. He ignored him and continued on. Yadril looked at everyone.
"What's he doing?"
Matthias shook his head and said,
"I don't know." "Think he'll be alright?"
Igor asked. None of them has answers and were concerned for their friend, but they didn't want to follow him either. And so they waited.
"Anyone else hungry?"
Curtis asked.
"I grew hungry hours ago,"
Igor said.
"I just don't want to leave without Inagil." "I don't want to either, but we don't know where he's gone or what's happening to him,"
Matthias said.
"He could be dead from the demons, or he could have found a way up and continued on without us."
He let out a deep sigh and said,
"Alright, let's go descend the floor below, grab some fruit and eat it on the way back up. Yadril, can you stay here and watch out for Inagil to see if he returns?" "What, why me?"
Yadril asked, disconcerted.
"Because if one of those things comes around, you can get away the easiest. Besides, we won't be gone long." "I can stay with Yadril while we wait,"
Igor said.
"Those things can be pretty sneaky and he can use an extra pair of eyes here."
Matthias nodded at them both and said,
"We'll be back soon."
Then he and Curtis turned and walked to the stairs leading down, disappearing from sight shortly. With them gone, Igor and Yadril took a seat and tried relaxing best they could. While waiting, Igor used his magic to form up a small square rock, and slowly he began pulling pieces away and reshaping it into what soon resembled a house. With nothing better to do, Yadril watched. Eventually, Matthias and Curtis returned with an extra dark fruit each, and even one for Inagil, and tossed them to Igor and Yadril. The two caught it and ate. Matthias took a look at the small city formed of rocks by Igor and asked,
"Still nothing then?"
"Nope," Yadril said between bites. Matthias sighed and said,
"Alright, we'll wait it out until our stomach's empty again. If he's not returned by the time then, Igor, you can leave him a message in the rocks and then we're going down."
And so they waited again until eventually they heard the sounds of approaching footsteps coming from the further mountain path. They turned their heads excited to see their friend, but instead their eyes beheld something new. Standing before them was a human-like creature with cobalt blue skin, and sapphire glowing eyes. They all stepped back and prepared to make a run for it when it spoke.
"Shall we continue, or will you turn around and go home now?"
the frigid prince asked. Torith swept his hand over the dusty book in the library.
"The Myths and Legends of Aladern."
Torith read the title out loud to himself. He grinned at the memories the book brought. He used to have Lena read him these fables every night before bed. Taking a seat, Torith picked up the book and flipped through the pages, reminiscing of when his world was full impossible stories from this book. Every night he would dream of battling a giant armed with only a broadsword, or taming a giant eagle from the peak of the Drogov Mountains and riding it into battle. He stopped rapidly flipping through the pages and slowed down now to look at the pictures. His eyes stopped on a picture of a human-looking man sitting atop a glacial throne.
"Zirek Aladern, the first king."
Torith read out loud to himself, unbelieving. Every later noble knew the story of the first King Xerek, but his family line had died off years ago. And the Tarok family took over the kingdom, as they were themselves originally descendants of Xerek Aladern. But the family was split by his ancestor Beatrice, who took the last name Tarok. Torith read on in the book, Maester Lena never read him this story. Whispering quietly to himself, it is said that Xerek conquered these lands once inhabited by storm giants, and in place of the eternal rains he used his frigid magic to change the weather so the lands would snow evermore and the winds would blow the cold up to the mountains, making the lands habitable for the first time in history. Xerek was a man of great height and a more slender build, his skin was cobalt blue, his long hair frosted blue and his eyes a radiant sapphire, glowing constantly. A king to behold, Xerek's ice magic made him immune to the cold and some even claim that fire couldn't even burn him. There is disturbing news from Evercane, Lena said quietly from behind Torith. His heat skipped several beats and his breath seemed to vanish from his lungs, but he didn't jump. The old Maester could move so quiet that she was like a shadow on the wall. Torith often wondered what her life was like before she came into service of his family. He turned to face her, closing the book with his offhand, and asked, "What is it?" She held out a rolled-up parchment for him. He took it and she summarized its contents. Evercane has been invaded by Cantor, their forces are inside their walls now and causing great havoc. They're requesting immediate assistance from us. Promising anything in return. How did they get through the gate in the first place, and why can't they handle Cantor on their own? Evercane's forces are vastly superior to them. Apparently there are many traitors in Alden's company and Cantor was not only just let inside without resistance at the gate, they managed to move their forces rather deep inside before they were met with any real resistance from soldiers. Furthermore, I have intel that suggests this may not be a random invasion, but a full-on coup as well. Torith stared at Maester Lena suspiciously now and asked, "Intel from where exactly?" The elder Maester only crooked a wicked smile, and for just the briefest of moments, as the candles at the table flickered, Torith could swear Lena's eyes were full black slits. But he quickly waved it off as trick of the light as she said, "Come now, my boy, an elder woman has to have some secrets, doesn't she? She would get too boring for the young to bother listening to if not." Torith sighed and read over the letter now. When he was done, he read over it again much slower. He then took a seat and stared at it, contemplating his options. Lena waited patiently for hours before Torith finally made a decision. Holding the edge of the rolled-up parchment to the candle flame, Torith said, "My father and brother went over there to discuss terms of an alliance with them, and he sent word back to me about then left for the tower." The parchment caught on fire at last and burned to ash in seconds. "That was over a year ago and still I have not heard word of either of them, not even a simple letter. My father made a pact with Alden, but he's gone, and I made no pact with him or brokered a deal. In order to get Cantor troops so deep inside Evercane without notice means that Alden has some extremely dangerous traitors in his company. I think it's in my kingdom's best interest that we take a page from the wise rulers of Dorgal and remain neutral. For the time being at least. So we're not going to lift a finger to help them?" Lena asked. "No, we shall wait to see how things play out. If Evercane, no Alden, can get affairs in order and begin properly resisting Cantor, then I shall ride to their aid immediately with the full force of Aladern at my back. But if Cantor overruns them, then we will march in to eliminate their remaining forces and take the lands of Evercane for ourselves." "You're much more like your father than all the others," Lena said with a smile. Torith stood up and stretched his legs. "I am his firstborn child after all. Yes, it's a shame too. I was hoping you would be more open to traditions. But when Anagil, the true king of Aladern, returns, he can't have people like you getting in his way." "What the hell are you talking about?" Torith asked, reaching cautiously for the knife hidden on the back of his belt. Lena's eyes changed to the full black slits that he thought he saw before, except now it wasn't a trick of the light. He grabbed his dagger, but couldn't draw it in time as Lena stabbed her dark clawed hand through his chest, piercing his heart. "Who are you?" he choked out. Lena pulled out her hand and Torith fell on his side to the floor. "Just a servant to the true king of Aladern," she answered. Chapter 27 Thrain and Company, Chapter 9 Thrain awoke shivering cold and with the sensation of tiny needles jabbing against his face. He got up slowly and found himself in a dark and damp little cavern area, with the jagged little crystals forming small bedrocks above the pool of water around. "Good, you're awake," a voice said from behind him. He turned and saw it was Garen who said that, and next to him were two bodies, one was Adeline, the other an elder man with frizzy white hair. He recognized the man right away and asked, "Is that
Grand Magister Cameron?"
Garen finished for him.
"Yeah, I was surprised myself when I pulled him out of the water too. By the way, Adeline is alright as well and breathing, both of them are."
Thrain came in for a closer look and asked,
"What is Cameron doing here?"
Garen shrugged and said,
"I don't know, how about when he wakes up we ask him? Unless this is some sort of a trick by the tower. And Cameron is a demon in disguise."
Thrain said darkly. Garen ignored the comment and said,
"No, I have not found our other comrades, and this place is too small for them to be hidden in here. They probably got separated from us in the tidal wave."
Thrain kept his eyes fixated on Cameron while he spoke, almost expecting him to suddenly wake up and attack them.
"How did you manage to get us out of that wave anyways?"
Thrain's suspicions started shifting over to Garen now.
"Yeah, thanks for sharing your concerns over our missing comrades as well,"
he said sarcastically. Thrain glared at him and Garen glared back but answered him eventually.
"I think Vera might have used her magic to shield us at the last second, but we ended up getting separated anyways. I remember struggling to hold on to her as the waters violently battered us around, then next thing I know I'm resurfacing for air in here. I saw you guys floating down in the water below and pulled you out, then collapsed on this patch of land, until waking up just a few minutes before you. There is only one passage out and it's more of a tunnel than some stairs, but it's the only way out I found."
Thrain sat back and relaxed a little then said,
"Looks like we're going to have to wait until they both wake up before getting answers from Cameron and moving on."
Garen stood up and headed for the ascending tunnel and said,
"You do that, I'm going to scout ahead and get some privacy to take a piss."
He returned a good while later with news of what's ahead of them.
"Well, the next floor appears to be a maze,"
he said sitting down.
"The walls are an aged color stone, yet still tough, and stretch up for at least 30 feet. I didn't hear any noises in there, so I don't think there are any demons up there."
Thrain said nothing and the two sat in quiet for a time until Adeline woke up in a coughing fit, spitting the water out of her lungs. Garen gently helped her roll to her side until she could breathe normally again. She got up slowly and looked around her then asked,
"Who's the old geezer with us?" "That's Grand Magister Cameron,"
Thrain answered. Settling into a comfy position Adeline said,
"I know the name, never seen the face though."
She doubled a look around her and asked,
"Where are the others?" "We got separated by the tidal wave,"
Garen said.
"I woke up in here and managed to stay awake long enough to pull all of us out of the water, then passed out myself for a time. I don't know where the others are though, or if they're alive. I found only one way out of this place and it leads up into a maze." "Well, that's reassuring,"
Adeline said sarcastically.
"Thrain? Garen? Is that you?"
Cameron asked as he started to rise to his feet. Thrain grabbed Cameron by his dark purple robes and slammed him against the wall. He pinned him there with one arm while holding the point of his sword at Cameron's throat. Garen and Adeline rose to their feet immediately and drew their weapons cautiously watching the scene unfold.
It's me,"
Thrain said, holding back none of his hostility.
"But tell me, Cameron, is that really you?" "No, it can't be you, because you're supposed to be outside the tower for one, and for two we climbed pretty damn high so you couldn't possibly reach us so fast."
Cameron kept his arms to his sides, his demeanor was flat and calm, if he was nervous he didn't show it.
"Is that what you think?"
Cameron asked.
"That I'm a demon?"
Thrain pulled away from pinning Cameron to the wall but kept his sword end pointed at his throat.
"That is the most probable thing right now. But you do seem to act like the Cameron I know, so I will give you one chance to prove you're who you appear to be. The first time we met you were 7 years of age, and I asked you if you wanted to be a magister when you grew up. And you said magic is for scrawny men with big brains. To which I replied that swords and axes are for large men with tiny brains. You got so mad with me that you challenged me to a duel right then and there. I obliged, and after a couple minutes of dancing around you, I cast a spell that threw you into the wall so hard it broke your arm. Your father came in after that and scolded you and asked if you learned your lesson. Your answer was to promise we would fight again when you were stronger."
Thrain smirked and pulled his blade away from Cameron and slid it back into its sheath saying,
"I never did get that rematch."
Garen and Adeline relaxed more after that and put their weapons away. Cameron got a good chance to look around the small cavern they were in now and asked,
"Where is my apprentice, Vera? I swear I saw her just before the wave struck down on us." "She, and the others, were just with us before that wave came down,"
Garen said.
I was right next to her when it caught us, but I guess we have been separated. She was uninjured before then and well rested, so she has a great chance of surviving. Yes, she's tough and smart, I trained her well. She will make it out just fine.
Cameron said, trying not to sound so forlorn.
It's your turn to answer some questions.
Thrain said in a sort of dark, commanding tone.
Firstly, what the hell are you even doing here, and second, what news of the outside have you brought?
Cameron was silent for a time, not sure how to answer the question. But seeing how anxious everyone was to hear what he had to say, he found an answer. Lightly shaking his head, Cameron said solemnly,
You were all gone for over a year now. You know things were fine at first, but then Cantor, and their invasion.
Cameron stopped there to take in a deep breath and let it out steady, getting his composure back. He looked up at them. His tone went from solemn to dark as he said,
It doesn't matter now. I was deceived by Lord Tarbeck and failed in my mission. So I came here to finish what I started. Cantor, invasion?
Thrain asked in disbelief.
What's going on out there? Is my wife all right? What happened to Jezebel?
His voice cracked at the end. Cameron said nothing more and held out his hand, then snapped his fingers. A blinding white flash complemented with a loud pop noise erupted from his hand. Thrain, Garen, and Adeline all went blind from the flash and could only hear a high-pitched ringing in their ears. They closed their eyes tight, fell to their knees and covered their ears with their hands until it all faded away. When they could see and hear again, they found Cameron was gone. Realizing he had been tricked, Thrain snarled, pulled out his blade, and raced up the tunnel stairs. Garen and Adeline were right behind him. The narrow cavern stairs were so small that Thrain and Garen practically had to crawl up them. If they didn't have their armor on, it would have been much easier to climb. Adeline ended up stuck behind the two of them, though she could still move swiftly in the tight space. It was dark ahead of them and they could barely see, but still, they climbed fast as they could. When they finally reached the top, and came out into the maze, they found Cameron just ahead, standing perfectly still.
Cameron,
Thrain shouted. Cameron didn't respond, so Thrain shouted again, approaching him hastily and without caution. The old Magister still gave no response, even when Thrain grabbed his shoulder and tried to turn him to be facing him. But Cameron didn't move, he was set in place like a heavy statue. Thrain walked around to the other side of Cameron to find his eyes wide open, but they were blank slates. When Garen and Adeline came around, they asked,
What is he doing? Spectral walking,
Thrain said, irritated.
Or whatever the fuck they call it. It's a magic that allow you to step outside your body and move as a specter. You can move faster than any horse and pass through any solid object. That's amazing,
Garen said, highly impressed.
It is, so why didn't we have Vera do that to scout ahead most of the times instead of sending in Lessa?
Adeline asked bitterly.
Because,
Thrain explained,
the specter is highly visible and any damage it takes backlashes onto the one casting it. Not only that, but the user can't seem to perform their other magic while in that specter mode. Vera would have been slaughtered in minutes. Unfortunately, Cameron seems to have built up a serious magic barrier around his physical body while he's in specter mode. Meaning we can't forcefully bring him out of it, we will have to wait until he returns on his own.
Thrain's eyes never once left Cameron while he spoke. Even now, while he pulled out one of the dark fruits from his bag and started to eat, his main focus was on Cameron. Garen and Adeline took the time to eat as well. Cameron returned to his body when a blurred humanoid light smashed into him and disappeared. He was disoriented for a moment but shook it off as Thrain stood in front of his path, staring him down.
Alright Cameron, no more tricks, time for the truth,
Thrain demanded.
What happened to my wife, and my child? Was it a boy, a girl?
Cameron saw the desperation for answers in Thrain's eyes, he owed him that much.
It was a girl, healthy and beautiful like her mom.
Thrain smiled at the news, and zoned out shortly thinking about it. His smile quickly faded as Cameron continued.
But when Cantor invaded and eventually took the capital,
he struggled briefly to continue.
They spared no one, and before anyone could take her daughter away from her, Jezebel leapt from the morning keep to her death.
Thrain fell to his knees in shock and sorrow over the news. His head hung low and he struggled to breath for a moment, then started very quietly sobbing.
I am sorry, truly sorry, Thrain,
Cameron said. His quiet sobbing stopped and he said,
No, not as sorry as you will be.
His tone was dark and cold, and as he rose to his feet, Cameron slowly took a couple steps back in fear. All hints of sorrow were abandoned from Thrain's face and a dark yellow ring formed around his pupils. In a blur of motion, swung his blade at Cameron. The Magister was fast and teleported away, but he only made it 10 feet past Thrain, where he landed on his side, a pool of blood oozing out from his stomach. Garen stepped in now and tried tackling Thrain, but he just shrugged him off and Garen crashed hard in front of him. Thrain then grabbed Garen by the neck with one hand, raising him up to his face. He was choking the life out of him as Garen was not strong enough to compete with the magic giving Thrain such incredible strength. Adeline didn't hesitate in knocking an arrow and aiming it at Thrain. She called to him once with a warning, but when he didn't respond immediately she let the arrow fly. The arrow pierced through his armor and hit him in the back, but Thrain was all but phased. She reached for another arrow when Thrain suddenly turned and threw Garen at her like he was a ragdoll. Knowing she didn't have the strength to catch Garen in all his armor, she rolled under him and had to let him smack against the wall. She knocked another arrow, as she came out of her roll on one knee, and aimed at Thrain, who was charging at her. The arrow flew from the bow, aimed at Thrain's neck, but Thrain was faster and knocked the arrow away with his blade. Coming in reach of her, Thrain slashed down at Adeline. She rolled out of the way and rose to her feet. Spinning around to face him, she found he was already upon her again, but this time she could do nothing as he stabbed his sword upwards through her chest. Her eyes went wide with shock, and Thrain couldn't even spare her a final word as he pulled his sword and let her body fall to the floor. Garen was just shaking off the hard hit he took when he saw Thrain chasing after Cambron in the maze. He looked around for Adeline, and when he found her, he shook off his fatigue entirely and ran to her. Gently, he scooped her head up and saw, in her still open eyes, she was dead. He shed silent tears for this friend he came to know, and for the master he had lost to madness. He closed her eyes shut and lay her down to rest in peace, then he got up and followed the blood trail into the maze. Garen followed the blood droplets into the maze, but they quickly became smaller and more scarce. Before too long they were gone entirely, and Garen found himself with 3 paths he could down, and not a clue as to which one is right. Instead of choosing randomly, Garen closed his eyes and smelled the air around him. Adeline taught him that people have a very distinct smell, and if you concentrated you could find it. Of course, his nose wasn't as well trained as hers, but it was good enough for him to find the path that had a sort of smell to it, which is where he should find Thrain. Literally following his nose, Garen started to hear very faint echoes of battle as he continued on. He stopped and listened in. There was no clashing of metal, but he could tell somehow that what he was hearing was without doubt a battle. He followed the light echo until it grew louder and louder, until he came upon Thrain and Cambron dueling it out. Small chunks of Thrain's armor lay scattered on around in the area the two were dueling, while Cambron's robe was soaked with blood, both his own and Thrain's. Weakened from the slice to the gut, Cambron proved far less of a match than he should have for Thrain as he slung his spells cautiously to preserve as much stamina as he could. But Thrain was relentless. Whenever Cambron pushed him back, or forced him to retreat, he would move in quickly while Cambron had to rest for a few seconds between spells. Eventually Cambron slipped up and Thrain got in close enough to swing his sword at him. Cambron ducked under it, narrowly dodging his head being cut off. But Thrain leaned to one foot and kicked Cambron in the torso, knocking him on his back. He went in for the kill, swinging his sword down at him, but Garen, who wouldn't fail this time, had snuck in close to him and blocked Thrain's blade. The metal rang in a high pitch, and for an instant the yellow rings circling Thrain's pupils vanished and he said, "Like music to my ears." The two stared off briefly, and when the yellow rings reappeared in Thrain's eyes, Garen pushed him back, giving Cambron an opportunity to turn and flee. Garen swung his blade at Thrain and he parried, then skipped around to Garen's back. Garen twisted around and blocked the strike coming for his leg. They continued on parrying each other's blows, moving step by step. Garen knew Thrain was holding back on him, but he also noticed the strange lack of exhaustion in Thrain. Using so much magic bursts, Thrain should be barely able to move right now, but instead he was fighting with Garen without trouble. In fact, Thrain was toying with him.
"What happened to you, Thrain?"
Garen asked as they walked around in a slow circle, staring each other down.
"Ever since we got here, you have been on a slow spiral into madness. But I never thought it would get this bad."
Thrain said nothing and lunged at him suddenly. Garen quickly turned to his side, as Thrain's blade scratched across his armor, and grappled his arm around Thrain's. Pivoting to one side, he pulled Thrain in and hurled him on his back. Thrain got up immediately in a blur of motion and knocked Garen against the wall. Garen lost the strength in his legs and slid down to a sitting position as Thrain charged at him. He held his sword out in a desperate attempt to block him. Thrain stopped his charge and turned his hips as he swung his blade with all his might. Garen's blade was slashed right through and a large streak cut across his armor. As Thrain hesitated to kill him, Garen shouted in rage, "Do it! You already killed one of your friends, killing me in cold blood shouldn't be a problem for you now." Thrain grit his teeth and suddenly lost all his energy and breath. As he took in huge gasps of breath and hunched over, Garen shouted more.
Fine, if you won't kill me then I will kill you.
He jabbed his broken blade at Thrain, who easily knocked it away, and then smacked Garen with the back of his hand so hard he was tossed to the floor and started seeing bright spots. He passed out for a time, but when he awoke he found he was still alive, and everything hurt. Thrain sparred him, but he was gone. All that was left behind was a blood trail of tiny droplets, probably Cameron's blood again. After knocking Garen out, Thrain struggled against the urge he had to finish him off. He beat it out and turned away and followed Cameron's blood trail again. As he moved on, small pieces of his armor started falling off, and by the time he found Cameron, over half his armor was lost, the rest had thick cracks through it. The old Magister was lying back on some stairs leading up to a golden-lit area that shined down on the steps. Cameron opened his eyes as he heard Thrain approaching and smirked.
You're too late,
Cameron struggled to say.
Rugal and the girls are already ahead of you. The last floor is just up ahead, they're going to get that wish and fix everything that I ruined.
Thrain said nothing and started to walk past him until Cameron raised his voice.
Thrain. Did you kill him?
He stopped and turned but still didn't speak.
Did you kill Garen? That boy has been like a son to you ever since you took him on as your squire. If you did kill him, then may ARan help you, for your soul would be truly lost then. The boy yet lives, but that doesn't matter now. Nothing does anymore, all that's left is to finish this mission, and then I will be free for good. But tell me, did Evercane burn while I was away, or just rot?
He turned to see what Cameron would say, but Cameron was already dead. And Thrain moved on to the final floor in the tower. Chapter 28. Volga the Apprentice, Chapter 5. During the long trip to Framir, Volga slowly figured out how to ride a horse decently enough. Half the time he couldn't even get the horse to move forward. The other times he would either veer it way off course and bump into Kira's horse, or he would fall off. She would smirk or giggle every time he messed up, but she would always stop to help him out again. The trip still took them weeks on end to get to the capital, because Volga was so slow to learn how to ride a horse. He had gotten good at it by now though. He wasn't a master rider by any means, but he was about average. The front gates to the capital were wide open, not that they closed often, only at times of crisis, and Volga and Kira took immediate notice of all the guards around them. It seemed a little strange to have more than a dozen guards standing watch at the front gates. They were stopped at the gates, but only for the captain to tell them their horses had to be stabled inside the city immediately. They were not allowed to ride them around in there. It wasn't a big deal for them, but they did find it annoying when they had to follow one of the guards, by foot, to the stables to have their horses settled in. And then there was the fee, which was cheap because their intended stay in the capital was only a few days. Volga had never been to Framir before, so he was excited. Kira on the other hand seemed rather apathetic. Typically when people think of the capital city of a magic-enriched kingdom, they see colors and bedazzle all along the streets and architecture impossible to create for normal builders. But Framir is not as magic as people may think. The capital city is drab with monotone colors, and the buildings design simplistic and well even throughout the city. Everything seemed to fit in exactly where it should, like a massive scale jigsaw puzzle. All the buildings and even homes were made entirely from stone or marble structure. Any wood used in their design would be either the window sills or the doors. Perhaps inside the homeowners could be more creatively free with their designs. Running down the center of the wider streets were mahogany flagpoles spaced exactly 10 feet apart each. On the tops of these poles were the white flags with a golden bird of fire, wings spanned out rising up, stitched onto the center, the phoenix. The phoenix was the symbol of the new regime of power in Dorgal, internally known as the Children of the Phoenix.
The phoenix stitched onto these flags are actually used with golden thread,
Kira said to Volga as he took it all in.
So when the sun starts to reach over the city, the golden light is reflected and shines all around, from the streets with the largest flags, to the business and homes with their own flags. For those few limited hours each day, Framir becomes the city of gold. That sounds amazing,
Volga said, astonished. Kira shrugged her shoulders and said,
Yeah, it is. For the first few months of living here. After that it gets rather annoying. Really, why's that? Makes it harder to sneak around and steal things. Even at night the moon shining on the flags lights the city up.
Volga scoffed and shook his head disapproving. They continued on without a word after that. Eventually they reached their destination, which Kira was very obscure about, which was a shady tavern in the more rambunctious part of the city. Even from across the street Volga could hear the loud sounds coming from inside the tavern. Standing just by the side of front doors of the tavern, guarding them, was a burly-looking woman with the sides of her head shaved in masculine style. The sleeves of her dark dress were torn off, revealing her muscular arms and the serpent tattoos riding up both of them. The bottom of her dress too was torn, but at the thighs, her legs had more ink showing than skin. Kira gaily approached the woman and casually asked her,
"What's with the dress, Mavis?"
The woman, Mavis, scoffed and said,
"Trying new things, catch more tail that way. Speaking, where you been, you sexy little fox you?"
Mavis reached her hand down and around Kira's lower back, grabbing her ass. Kira half jumped startled and pushed Mavis' arm away.
"See, now this is why you're still single,"
Kira said. Mavis raised an eyebrow and glanced over to Volga standing awkwardly on the side. Kira didn't even look back at him before saying,
"Nope, still single, he's a new friend. Anyways, are the boys here?" "Them boys practically live here now, but they ain't boys no more."
Kira smirked and said,
"Yeah, we'll see about that."
She then proceeded to walk into the tavern, but Mavis grabbed her by the arm and stopped her, looking her in the eyes with a somber expression on her face.
"After the gang split up, they had to find work somewhere more rough."
Kira took a step back and Mavis let go of her arm.
"Are they in some kind of trouble now?"
Kira asked. Mavis hesitated to speak.
"No, not anymore. Just that the only work they could get with their talents was with some mercenaries." "Okay, which ones?"
Mavis sighed and shook her head. She spoke so quiet Kira struggled to hear her over the booming noises from the tavern inside.
"The Crimson Falcons."
Hearing the name, Kira's eyes widened with shock.
"By the Sisters' Mercy,"
Kira whispered to herself. She shook her head doubting and asked,
"Are they all right?"
Mavis looked away.
"The only survivors."
Kira frowned, but after a while signaled Volga, with her hand, to follow her inside. Inside the noise was booming and Volga could hardly hear his own thoughts.
"Well, that was too depressing for me right now,"
Kira half shouted. She looked around the tavern a couple times before spotting her old friends. Shen then grabbed Volga's shoulder and said,
"You see those two in the far off corner over there?"
She pointed out to the far end of the tavern, where in a dark secluded corner, devoid of any of the other liveliness around, sat a pair of grim figures.
"That's them sitting there in that eerie corner solemnly drinking,"
she continued.
"Their names are James and Edmund. Go introduce yourself and tell them Kira the Red Fox sent you." "Wait, you aren't joining me?"
Volga asked, perplexed.
"Nope,"
she said with a big smile while looking over to the bar.
"I'm going to go break my pussy off on that hunk at bartender's cock." "Are you serious right now?"
Volga asked as Kira started walking off. She didn't stop but turned back to him and shouted over all the other loud noises,
"See you back at the inn." "I'm glad we got separate rooms now,"
Volga muttered to himself as Kira disappeared in the crowd of patrons. He made his way through the bustling noisy tavern to the secluded dark corner with the two grim figures drinking alone. Standing before their table, Volga said,
"James and Edmund."
Neither of them even looked up at him, they just sat there staring blankly at their drinks.
I wanted to talk to you two about this thing."
Still they didn't respond to him. Volga had always been socially awkward, his time with Kira, and all her vulgarities, helped a lot with that, but right there and now he couldn't pull himself together. He took in a deep steady breath and let it out slow, then said,
"Kira sent me. Kira the Red Fox."
That got their attention as they looked up at him with their platinum eyes. One of them got out of his seat and took a couple steps forward.
"Did she now?" "Yes, she did, as a matter of fact." "Well then, give her a message for us."
Without warning, he pulled his arm back, then swiftly delivered a strong punch right at Volga's face. The suddenness and force of the blow knocked him on his back, and the many patrons who had seen it burst into laughter. He rose to his feet as the guy who punched him settled back into his seat. Volga wiped the blood from his nose and glanced at it before glaring at the two.
"You know, Kira had great expectations of you two, said you were something else. But really you're just a pair of miserable losers. Talking with you is a huge waste of my valuable time. Enjoy your life sulking in the dark."
Volga then turned away and searched for Kira. When she couldn't be found, he returned to the inn and cleaned his face up before climbing in bed and sleeping. The next morning Volga woke up and pounded hard on Kira's door. There was no answer, either she was passed out drunk or not even there. That was no surprise for him, the real surprise was finding James and Edmund downstairs at the inn waiting for him. They looked so much more different now that he could actually see them properly. Their platinum eyes seemed to shine in the light, and their dark hair had unusual streaks of silver in it. They looked very identical, almost like brothers, except one was taller than the other and more slender, and the other was shorter but bulkier. Both of them a head taller than Volga himself, and both not too much older than him, they looked to be in their mid-20s. It was hard to tell with the numerous little scars on their faces.
We were thinking about what you said last night,
the taller one said, his accent, now that he could hear properly, sounded foreign to Volga.
And we wanted to know what you, and Kira, wished to speak with us about.
Volga took a long moment to find his voice, still in minor shock of their presence there.
The inn is serving some a breakfast. If you guys wanted to eat, I'm hungry so I'm eating.
He turned away from them and briskly walked to the dining area of the inn. Those two, he thought to himself. They're giving off a dangerous and powerful aura. Just as the two came in and sat with Volga, the waitress was already taking his order. She looked eager to get away from them as soon as possible now but stayed long enough to hear all their orders. When she was gone they all sat there staring awkwardly at each other in silence.
So which one of you is James, and which one is Edmund?
Volga asked trying to sound casual. They glanced at each other then glared at Volga.
I'm Edmund,
the taller one said.
And I'm James,
the bulkier one said. Volga tapped his fingers nervously on the table while waiting for their food. Before long James said,
We didn't come here for games, tell us what you wanted with us now.
Volga glared at him, and then took a look around the room to make sure no one was listening. All the other people there were too busy with their meals to care about them, or too scared of James and Edmund to look in their direction.
All right,
he said,
I'm searching out strong companions to help me acquire the wishes in the Devil Tower.
James scoffed and went to stand up to leave but Edmund suddenly grabbed his shoulder stopping him. As James settled back into his chair Edmund said,
You said wishes, not wish.
Volga grinned and said,
You're perceptive, but that's right it's not just one wish in there. And it's not at the top either. So where is it, them? Where are these wishes exactly?
Volga scoffed and said no more. They sat in long silence until their food arrived and Volga started digging into his meal.
You have nerves, good.
James said. A moment later the dark hostile aura around them faded and Volga was able to relax easier. The two started eating their meal with Volga and between bites Edmund asked,
Can you at least tell us how many wishes there are exactly? There are 7 wish gems total. And only I know where to find them in the tower, and only I can lead the way to them.
Volga said.
Now I got a question for you. Are you guys brothers or something? Cousins actually,
Edmund said. They ate their meals in silence after that and just as they were finishing Kira showed up at last. She pulled up a chair to the table and said with a tired yawn,
Hey guys, how long you been up? Nice for you to finally join us,
Volga said sarcastically.
I presume you had a good time last night with that bartender.
She moaned passionately thinking back to it and said,
Yup. The guy's cock was as thick as my wrist, and wow did he know how to get in there and grind around.
Volga should be used to her by now but still stared at her wide-eyed as James and Edmund chuckled.
Good to see you have not changed too much,
James said.
I wish I could say the same, you two look grim. I heard it was bad but I didn't think it was that bad. We're alive,
Edmund said.
Yeah but not for the better. I mean did you really have to join such a radical group? We have only one real talent and after the group split up the only place we could go was with them. We just didn't think it would go so bad. Well you're here now and I have some work for you if you're interested. Yes your friend told us already,
Edmund said.
We'll need time to think it over of course. You have our answer by the same time tomorrow morning,
Kira said for Volga.
If we don't see you after we have eaten our breakfast then we're to assume your answer is no. This is the chance of a lifetime you two, don't pass it up for something lesser.
James and Edmund took their leave and Kira was able to order some food at last.
So what did you think of them?
Kira asked.
I think they have some serious power which we will need. But, I fear their raw power may make them arrogant. They have always been arrogant, but not too stupid. Still given how much they changed since we were apart I don't know what they might try when they think we're no longer needed. I can say the exact same thing about you, still this isn't something I can do alone. If they join us I'll need to test their power for myself, or at least see what they're capable of. But I think with the three of us we can cross of Magisters off the list of needed companions. Alright then, who will we need? We'll need warriors, strong and talented ones. I don't know what sort of monsters we will face inside the tower, and the people in there will be just as bad I'm sure. The people we know will try to cut our throats to remove any competition from them and their wish. The monsters inside the tower I'm sure will serve as guard dogs to the real wishes. Well anyways, I'm going to go do some research at the city's grand library.
Kira snickered and said,
Wow, of course you would do that instead of seeing the sights, or trying to find a pretty girl to warm your bed. Knowledge is power,
Volga called back to her as he walked away. He then muttered the last part quietly under his breath,
and I intend to make it out of this whole ordeal alive.
The next morning James and Edmund showed up, each wearing a light grey cloak with the hoods over their heads, and a cloth of the same color, covering their faces from just below the eyes. The only reason Kira and Volga knew it was them is because their voices and they were expecting them to show. Kira of course knew why they were dressing like this, but she didn't want to worry Volga, so she kept her mouth shut.
Why are you two dressed like that?
Volga asked confused.
Does it matter?
James said.
We're here, we agree to join you, so let's go. Why are you in such a hurry all of a sudden?
Volga asked, starting to grow suspicious. Hesitantly Edmund said,
Framir has been going through some old animosity from the citizens and the council since that tower showed up. We don't want to be here when things finally fall into chaos here. Now that you mention it, when I was walking around I could see the guards were on edge just patrolling the streets. And the citizens all stopped what they were doing to glare at them as they passed on by. Maybe you are right, maybe we should just get out of here and move on now. I'll grab our bags, Kira, go check us out.
While Volga went up to their rooms, Kira asked,
Alright, what sort of trouble have you guys gotten yourself into this time?
They didn't answer.
Alright guys, seriously, it's me we're talking about, I have kept your worst secrets before.
She raised her arm up and pointed at her wrist.
Remember how I was the reason the group split up? Well, guess what, I was forced to wear that stupid wristband that blocks my magic because I was protecting you, all of you. So I think you owe me at least this much.
They looked at each other and Edmund came closer to her and whispered in her ear,
The reason the Crimson Falcons were so wanted is because we assassinated 2 members of the council. I can't deal with this,
Kira said, turning away.
You guys aren't worth this much trouble. What you did was a capital crime, they will hunt you everywhere you go, no kingdom will protect you from this. Kira, wait, that's not why we're wanted, as far the council knows everyone from that mercenary gang is dead. Only a few old friends of theirs, Mavis included, know about us being in it. We're wanted because somehow the council knows that we are the last 2 living relatives of Dorgal's royal family, we're the king's great-great-nephews.
Chapter 29 Irene the Sly, Chapter 6. As they walked, Theo and Nethlin strode up between Irene and said,
So new girl, got any special talents? None that may be useful in here, no,
she answered.
Oh, well, our parents were fire dancers,
Theo said.
Yeah, so we inherited some cool tricks,
Nethlin continued for his brother.
Watch this. Watch this.
They both said at the same time. The twins then snapped their fingers and a sparkling fire in the form of a rose exploded lightly in front of them. It faded in seconds and Nethlin asked,
Pretty cool, right?
Irene frowned and said,
I don't like magic at all, sorry.
She then moved on ahead of them as they started arguing with each other. Caleb caught up to her and said,
The twins seem only capable of doing those sparks, they got great at doing little party tricks like that, Rose, but they lack raw power and,
he paused to think a moment,
finesse? Is that the right word?
Irene shrugged her shoulders and said,
I don't know.
Caleb shrugged and said,
Well, whatever, anyways you will get used to them soon enough, they're eccentric though. It's not that, I just don't like magic is all. I can sort of see why. I'm a little envious of it, but being without it, it does seem rather scary, and foreign. Hey, what's going on here?
Myra asked as she pushed herself between Caleb and Irene and wrapped her arm around Caleb's.
Yeah, hi, thanks for doing that,
Caleb said sarcastically. Myra pouted and said,
I'm sorry, you guys looked really bored, I thought I could help with that.
Caleb sighed.
It's fine, just don't be so rude next time, alright?
Meyer smiled and perked right up.
Alright, I can do that.
Irritated Irene slowed her pace way down to let them get ahead. When they were further along, Meyer took a quick glance behind her to see Irene fallen back. Then she said to Caleb,
I don't like that new girl, and I don't trust her either.
Irene fell far behind to hear any more after that and lingered on in the back of the group. During the next major rest stop they took, Irene took first point of lookout, still having trouble sleeping. It was quiet at first until Meyer came up to talk to her.
Hey new girl,
she said.
Irene sighed and said, my name is Irene, and you should be getting some sleep like the others. You know new girl, I don't like you, and I don't trust you either. Alright, I got it, you hate me, now leave me alone.
Meyer grabbed Irene by her shirt and pulled her up on her feet.
You need to stay away from Caleb too, he's mine, got it? Get your hands off me,
Irene said in a slow and hostile tone. Meyer smirked but let go of her.
Just stay away from Caleb from now on.
She then turned away and went back to her spot to sleep. Irene stayed up on watch until Adelia came by to swap her out and let her get some rest. It was hard, but Irene managed to fall asleep. She later awoke to the sounds of screaming. All around her, new companions were frantically running from the red-cloaked people. They didn't get far before they were caught by their fire magic and burned alive. Irene lay paralyzed watching as her new friends slowly burned alive. The smell of their burning flesh filled her nose, and the screams of their agony filled her ears. Caleb was the last to die before her eyes. With all of them gone now, the red cloaks turned to Irene and set her ablaze. She woke up just as the burning sensation touched down on her, covered in sweat and gasping desperately for air. Everyone was gathered around her looking concerned. Caleb kneeled down to her and put his hand on her back, gently rubbing her.
It's alright, he said soothingly, it was just a bad dream. You're alright now, I promise, everything is going to be okay.
He smiled at her and she smiled back.
Actually, it's not going to be okay,
Meyer said grudgingly. Irene ignored her.
Meyer, leave her alone, I saw you picking on her earlier, this stops now, got it?
Adelia said harshly. Caleb helped Irene climb to her feet and asked,
do you want to talk about that nightmare? You were really spooked and started screaming and kicking around in your sleep.
Irene swallowed the lump in her throat and slowly shook off her goosebumps.
It was horrible, the red cloaks came back and used their magic to burn all of you alive. And I couldn't move at all, but I was watching it all happen, then they came to me and set me on fire.
Caleb pulled her in a hug and gently stroked her hair.
It's fine now, everything is fine.
She pulled away and wiped her tears.
I'm just glad I'm not alone anymore. Who says you're not alone?
Meyer asked with malevolence. Irene glared at her, then went back to looking at Caleb. But when her gaze swept by, she noticed the others were suddenly missing. She doubled a look around and found that now Meyer had too disappeared. It was just her and Caleb left.
What happened to everyone? They were just here.
Irene asked, panicking a little. Caleb stepped back from her and shook his head.
You poor girl, we were never here to begin with. We were all just inside your head. No, this is just another fucked up dream, she said despondent.
He smiled darkly and asked, is it though? He then faded away into the enclosing darkness that surrounded her. She woke up yet again, alone and with her vanishing cloak. She got up and called out everyone's names, no answer. She frowned and began walking on ahead, checking her back constantly. She kept moving on, ignoring her hunger for fear of stopping, when the exploding sound of sparkling fire woke her up once again. She was back where she was before when she went to sleep, everyone around her, the twins having a laughing fit at their prank. Gasping for breath, she got up and ran away in a panic.
Look what you two morons did,
Adelia said, scolding the twins. They stopped their laughing in time to see Irene still running away in fear. They immediately felt bad now.
I told you two not to do it, but you still did.
While Adelia continued scolding the twins, Caleb chased after Irene. He found her a good distance away, sitting behind one of the violet trees, her knees up with her head tucked away, sobbing to herself.
Irene? It was just a stupid prank, okay? Go away, you're just another messed up dream,
Irene said through her muffled sobbing.
I'm done with it and not playing this game anymore, so just go and let me wake up for real. Irene, this isn't a dream, you're awake now.
He reached his hand out and touched her shoulder. She bolted upright and pulled out her dagger in a flash, pointing it at his throat.
I said go.
Caleb raised his hands peacefully and took a few steps back. He frowned seeing her saddened and paranoid state but walked away despite himself. As he returned to the group, the twins looked at him hopefully but he just shook his head. Adelia came up to him and whispered,
"What's wrong with her? Was their prank really that bad?" "I don't think it was their prank,"
he whispered back to her concerned.
"She went on and on about this all being some sort of messed up dream and that we weren't real."
Adelia sighed.
"Alright, let me handle this, feel free to scold the twins to vent your frustration."
She found Irene easily enough, she was still very shaken but no longer sobbing like Caleb said. She leaned against the tree with her arms crossed and said,
"Care to tell me exactly what happened in this dream of yours that has you so spooked?"
It took her a while but Irene eventually talked.
"I woke up the first time to the screams of everyone, the red cloaks were back and burning all of you alive. I couldn't move but could hear your screams and smell your burning flesh. They came after me and I woke up after being torched. You were all around me and Caleb was comforting me, it was just as real as the dream before it. Then the next thing I knew half of you were gone when I looked the other direction and back. I looked around to find everyone was gone but Caleb who said you were never really there. That I imagined it all from my loneliness, I woke up again back before you guys found me, alone and with my vanishing cloak still there. I continued on trying to shake it off when the loud boom sounds erupted and I woke up here. I can't continue if this keeps up."
Adelia took a seat next to her and said,
"You know I had a similar dream state like yours following right after we escaped the Red Wraiths. I dreamed that I was in fact back in the clutches of the Red Wraiths, and that everything I experienced before then was just part of their ritual. I was still thinking that maybe what's happening all around me right now is in fact still a part of their cruel dream, until I heard you went through something similar just now. And I finally understand that I'm actually awake right now, so are you, and that this is one of the ways the tower is testing us. How do I know I can believe or trust anything that you're saying right now? That's up for you to decide, but we're moving on soon. So if you still don't believe you can continue on with us, then that's your choice, and I'll let the others know. Regardless, we will be moving ahead with or without you."
Adelia then walked away, leaving Irene to think about her options. She rejoined the group, though still shaken up, and the twins apologized profusely, even though she said it wasn't their fault entirely. Myra was annoyed at the news but she didn't hassle Irene about it either. On the next floor, the girls were happy to find that amongst the bedrock terrain there were steaming springs throughout the floor. Simhil put her hand in one of the springs, waved it around, and then said,
"Ah, the water is perfect. Let's go further ahead then, I will test out the waters to make sure it's safe to bathe in,"
Adelia said. They went on to the far end of the floor where they found the stairs but didn't proceed up them right away like the other floors. Instead they stayed back and Adelia tested the waters with her magic, which all Irene saw was her putting her hands in and sitting silently for a few minutes.
"The waters are safe from what I can tell. So first thing we will do is wash our clothes, then set them out to dry. And then we will bathe ourselves."
She then turned to face the boys.
"And you three will go so far that we can't see you, and vice versa, to do the same, got it? But what if there's trouble?" "But what if there's trouble?"
the twins asked with a big smile. Adelia gave them a stern look and said,
"If there is, then one of yous will just have to shout."
She then went into her bag and pulled a very light pink bar and handed it to Caleb.
"Remember, wash your clothes first then yourselves, use this for both."
Caleb took it then led the twins far off in the distance until they were just blurred figures.
"I can still sort of see them,"
Irene protested shyly.
"It's fine, they can't see enough from that far,"
Adelia said. She then handed Irene a very light green bar like the one she handed Caleb, except theirs was pink, which smelled like spearmint. She then stripped off her clothes revealing her beautiful slender figure. Her body looked well toned, her hips curved wonderfully and her breasts were large and kept good height on her chest. All of them, now stripped naked, went into the same spring and let out a soft moan of joy. All save for Irene, who went into the hot spring next to them and stripped her cloths down inside and started scrubbing them with the bar that Adelia gave her. The bar turned into small bubbles when it was scrubbed against her clothes and even skin. When the girls finished washing their clothes, they got out of the spring to lay them down neatly on the ground to dry, then went back in to wash themselves and enjoy the hot bath. It wasn't long though until trouble came along.
"We have some uninvited guests coming along,"
Adelia said looking out in the distance. 3 tall figures stood out there, gradually coming closer.
What should we do?
Simhil asked.
Well, I don't know about you two, but I'm not ready to give my hot bath up just yet. So we will let them pass by. If they give us trouble, I will handle them, and you 3 stay in the springs.
The 3 figures off in the distance turned out to be 3 sordid-looking men well into their 40s. Dressed in simple woolen trousers and slack vests, they all had a cheap belt strapping a fancy-looking blade to them. The same belts and blades sold by the shoddy merchants outside the tower.
Well now, look here at these lovely ladies,
the fatter man said, stopping before the spring the girls were in.
We're trying to bathe in peace, so if you don't mind, move along,
Myra said.
Now I don't see why me and my boyos can't join you in there. We ain't had no bath in a while either. The company would be very welcome too.
The other 2 men laughed at the end part. Adalia then climbed out of the spring, no care for exposing her naked body to these perverse men. She walked up to them with a sweet smile, then gently put her hands around 2 of the men's throats. She then leaned in and whispered something between them. The 2 men's eyes went bloodshot an instant later, and dark veins raced up around their necks and faces. Seconds later Adalia let go of them and they dropped to the ground, eyes wide open and unblinking. The 3rd man reached for his blade, but Adalia was quicker, delivering a firm kick to his crotch. He fell to his knees and moaned in great pain. She then pushed him on his back and walked over to stomp on his throat until he was dead. The girls were horrified by the scene, but Adalia just hopped back in the hot spring casually. Simhil and Myra backed away from her a little. Irene decided she was done after that and got out of the spring and started walking around to dry herself off faster. When she was no longer wet, she put her clothes back and waited for the others to finish. When they did get out, Adalia said,
Irene, since you're the only one ready, go tell the boys to get out soon and get dressed. And if they already are, then wait a little bit and bring them back. All right,
Irene said, turning to walk to where the boys went off to.
And don't be afraid to get a good look at their dicks,
Simhil called out playfully. Irene's face grew bright red at the thought, and she started looking down at her feet instead of ahead as she continued. The sounds of laughter brought her head back up. She saw the 3 boys still in the spring splashing the waters at each other and wrestling around in there. The twins dunked Caleb's head under. A little while later he suddenly resurfaced behind them and dunked them both in. When they came up, they spit 2 mouths full of water on Caleb, wiping the smirk on off his face. All of them laughed some more.
Adalia said to dry off, get dressed and come back,
Irene said, interrupting them.
That works for me,
Caleb said, climbing out of the spring.
My hands have gotten all soggy and gross anyways. Ours too. Ours too,
the twins said, climbing out as well. Irene immediately turned away and blushed. She walked back to the other springs with Adalia to give the boys privacy. When the boys met back up with them, they saw the corpses of the 3 men and asked what happened.
They tried jumping into the springs with us, so I killed them,
Adalia said coldly. The boys grimaced at the thought as they moved on, heading up the stairs to the next floor. Chapter 30. Prince Rugal, Chapter 1. Rugal woke up hearing the distant sounds of familiar voices. He opened his eyes slowly and saw 2 blurry faces in front of him. Blinking slowly a few times, his eyes came into focus and he saw Vera and Iris staring down at him.
Rugal, can you hear me?
Iris asked.
Are you alright?
Rugal managed a small smile and said,
a little waterlogged, but I'll live.
He then sat up slowly as the girls helped him. Looking around, he saw they were in a brilliant cavern made entirely of the small sparkling crystals from the floor with the rapid river. The serene beauty of the place was a nice change of everything, but Rugal couldn't enjoy it long. When he noticed it was just the 3 of them, he turned to the girls and asked them,
what happened to the others? Are there any signs of them? I'm afraid not,
Iris said.
When we woke up here, we searched around for them, but all we could find were some stairs leading up to the next floor. It's just us now. They could have survived though, right?
Vera asked, concerning. Rugal climbed to his feet slowly and said,
honestly, I don't know. Garen and Thrain would have trouble swimming with their heavy armor, but then again, I managed to survive in mine, so maybe they did too. And Adeline, she's tough, a little water wouldn't bring her down.
He took a few steps before he suddenly lost most of his balance and fell to one knee. Iris rushed over to help him, but he held out his hand to stop her.
I'll be fine,
he said.
Just need a few more minutes to rest. And maybe some food.
Iris handed him his bag and he pulled out one of the dark fruits from inside and started eating it.
We should eat too,
Vera suggested as she grabbed her bag. Iris agreed, and soon the three of them sat around slowly eating their fruit. When they finished, Rugal tried walking again. He was wobbly at first, but oriented himself quickly enough.
Alright then, he said. Let's continue up. If the others are alright then we won't find them down here.
Climbing up to the next floor, Iris said,
and coming out of the beautiful and serene caverns, we enter this bleak dull maze. Hey, I will take bleak and dull any day over that forest or the swamp before it.
Vera said.
It's not as pretty as the cave, but it seems to be our only way to continue on, or get anywhere.
Rugal said. He looked around. The maze walls reached at least 100 feet up, maybe higher.
This place most likely doesn't have any dark fruit trees growing in it, and it could take us days just to find out way out. So if either of you have any ideas on how we can find the exit right away, I am all ears.
They were quiet for a good time, but just as Rugal was about to turn away and walk blindly into the maze, Vera spoke up.
I actually may have something like that,
she said. Rugal gestured for her to go on when she didn't continue right away.
It's called spectral walking. I can pass through most solid objects, save for ones magically enchanted, and move about twice the running speed of horses. Depending on how large the maze is. Well, it will take time regardless.
Vera stopped there and Rugal asked,
There is a but coming, isn't there? But if there are any demons in this maze, and they attack me, any damage my spectre takes will come back to my physical body. And I can't perform other magic while I'm using spectral walking. Aside from running, I would be helpless. Also, if there are any demons nearby that come and attack us, I would be useless. There is no way to force me back to my body. I'd just be dead weight for you guys.
Rugal took a long look at the maze ahead of them, then said,
We have no idea of what lies ahead of us, and if it's more demons, I would much rather all of us face it together. But we could too easily starve to death trying to find our way through here. Vera, your spectral walking is our best chance of getting out of this floor, and maybe even finding the others if they made it up here. So I must insist you do it right away. And if you can, try not to return until you find something worth note.
Vera looked extremely nervous, but she said yes all the same. So she sat down with her legs crossed, and after a minute of silent focus, a humanoid light projected out of her and in a blur of motion raced off into the maze.
There she goes,
Iris said unenthusiastically. She then sat down and rested her back against a wall. Rugal joined her, keeping an eye on Vera, and asked,
What's wrong? It's nothing, just the first chance we are alone together and I can't even enjoy it.
Iris said.
Yeah, after what's happened lately I sort of miss the boredom of the earlier floors. Where most of us said nothing and we just searched out for the next stairs, little concern for what lies ahead.
Iris shook her head lightly and said,
It's not that, it's... Well, after that whole tidal wave incident, I mean we had close calls before, but that was somehow the worst one yet. And after we woke in that cave, I had a lot of time to think while you and Vera were out.
She leaned her head on Rugal's broad shoulder.
I just thought that by now we would be married. Now I fear we may never get the chance.
Rugal grabbed Iris' hand and squeezed gently.
I promise you, one of the first things we will do when we get home is get married. Spring, winter, I don't care what the season is, we will have ourselves that wedding under the light of the full moon. With the pipers' flutes playing their gentle melody.
Iris smiled at the thought of their dream wedding night and asked,
What if there are clouds blocking the sky that night? Then we will have the kingdom's magisters clear out a circle in those clouds where just you and I will stand together basking in the blue light. And we will have a row of lamps guiding you to me.
Iris then closed her eyes and let herself stay in that image until Vera returned. Well over a few hours later, Vera's spectre returned to her and she was active again. At first she was a little shaken up, for a moment or two, but returned to her normal self in no time.
Are you alright?
Iris asked, concerned. Vera got to her feet and said,
Yeah, it's nothing, I saw another spectre in the maze. I mean, first of all, this place is enormous, there is no way we would find our way out just by wandering. And secondly, the other spectre was humanoid, though I only got a glimpse of it.
When Vera didn't elaborate, Rugal asked,
I don't know what that means. Is it something we should worry about? Another humanoid spectre would mean there is another magister in this maze right now,
Iris explained.
Unless it was a trick of your mind. It definitely was not,
Vera said, affirmed.
There is without doubt another magister in this maze. Then it means someone else must have caught up to us already, maybe more than just one,
Rugal said, alarmed.
They can't be with us since you two are the only ones with that kind of magic in them. Actually it's just Vera,
Iris corrected him.
I don't know how to perform the spectral walking magic. My family specializes in combat magic above all, spectral walking is practically the exact opposite of what we strive for. Regardless, it doesn't sound good for us right now. Vera, did you find anything else in the maze? Possible traps, demons? Nothing like that, but I did find the exit, and I made special marks, only I would notice, that will lead us there.
Rugal held his arm out in gesture.
Lead the way. I'll follow beside you, and Iris, you cover our backs.
Iris would rather have been up front with Rugal, but because it was only the three of them she didn't argue, just pouted a little.
Magic is weird,
Rugal said as Vera led them through the maze. She scoffed and said,
yeah, that's what half of them say, the other half aren't as good as hiding their envy for magisters. Don't get me wrong, I love magisters, but from my end it's weird. Sometimes magisters are like a foreigner from a whole other world, and everything they do makes sense to them, but you have no idea what the hell is going on. I take it you have not seen much magic, outside the battlefield I mean. More than most in the kingdom, but, I don't know, sometimes I think the world would be better if...
He trailed off at the end.
If no one had magic?
Vera inquired on what he was going to say.
No, actually I think it would be better if everyone had magic. If everyone had the same kind of power, maybe we wouldn't have so many wars, maybe the others will leave Evercane alone for once. With or without magic people still go to war, Aladern and Dorgal are proof of that. But you already knew this, and your using magic is weird as the base for you to build up to say what's really on your mind. Wow, I see you're not the prodigy magister for nothing.
He let that sentence linger for an uncomfortable amount of time before continuing.
When my father passes away, the burden of the throne falls to me, and truth is I don't really want to be king all that much. Evercane has been in more peril these last couple generations than it ever has before since its founding. First the Aladern invasion, which forces us to destroy two of our great bridges, which have stood for almost as long as the wall before it. Then the Cantor invasion, which, by the way, a little known fact, wars swallow gold like a sinkhole does lands. We used to be the wealthiest kingdom in all of Grimnor, but after two wars so close to each other's we barely have enough to keep up the illusion of wealth. We could get by with our bounty of great and fertile lands, but now this shithole tower appears and starts taking that from us too.
Rugal let out a painful sigh and hung his head low.
I could barely lead a small force into the Keshmir forest when Cantor invaded, how can I lead an entire kingdom, coming to the verge of ruin, into its forming glory? You know, strange as it may seem, I can understand where you're coming from, and what you're going through.
Vera said empathetically.
Can you now?
Rugal asked sardonically. Vera glared at him and he turned his head, a little shamed about how he posed the question.
In fact I can, because as you know, after Cambron passes away I am his successor to the Grand Magister of the kingdom. Meaning your father, and someday you, will come to me for any and all magical problems. But it's more than just that, the Grand Magister is on the council as higher spoken advisor, is in charge of all the magisters around the kingdom, basically it's like being king, or queen, but for the magic people of the realm. I don't understand why he chose me to be groomed as his replacement in the role. I know I'm talented at magic, in fact it's the one thing I'm good at. But for everything else I'm just terrible. I would sleep past every council summons if not for Cambron. I have no tactical strategies, and I can't for the life of me be bothered to memorize all the lords and ladies' names of great houses. Grand Magister is like the crown and ultimate pinnacle for Magister in the kingdom. It's an enormous title to live up to, and I'm just a girl from a small town east of the river who's good at magic. I don't understand why Cambron kept me on as his apprentice for so long when I can't fit all the roles required of me. Well, he obviously believes in you. Besides, if you can't keep up with all the tedious demands the title requires, you can always pull your own team of assistants to help unload with all the work. Cambron does it whenever he needs a vacation. One time I saw him lounge around for a couple months letting his assistants do all the work for him. I think I remember that. He said he was working on a secret project at the time. Yes, it was called Becoming Wise and Lazy. That old coot, I knew something was up when he didn't let me in on the project. Yes, the burdens of leadership, telling others what to do while you relax.
They both laughed at Rugal's comment. It had been a while since either of them laughed, it felt good.
We've been walking for hours,
Rugal said.
How much further do we have left to go? I only have a few more markers left, I told you this place was enormous,
Vera said. Their next turn led them to a long corridor, looking exactly the same as all the others.
Alright, we just passed my last marker, we turn right at the end here and the stairs leading up are there. I said it before, I'll say it again, I hate mazes.
Iris said.
Well, it's a good thing we're almost out of this,
Rugal started to say as they turned the corner until he saw what lay on the other side and stopped. Around the corner were the stairs leading straight up, with golden light pouring down onto them from the floor above. And on the stairwell lay a man with frizzy white hair and a thin grey beard, bleeding out.
Cameron!
Vera gasped at the sight of him. She rushed to him without a second thought and Rugal and Iris followed her. Cameron's eyes snapped open at the sound of Vera's voice. She kneeled down to him and asked, "Is it really you?" He strained a smile and said,
Yes, yes my dear, it's really me. I'm so happy to see you're alive and well. God of Light, Cameron, what are you doing here and what the hell happened to you?
Rugal asked as he looked over Vera to Cameron's wounds. Setting his eyes on Rugal, a wave of guilt washed over his face, guilt and partial regret.
I failed out there, so I raced up here to finish what I started. But here I am, just as much of a failure as before.
Vera could no longer hold back the tears welling in her eyes as she tried in vain to heal her master's wounds. Cameron grabbed her hands and gently squeezed, telling her to stop.
I don't understand what happened to you. I tried.
Cameron paused to take in a deep breath and let it out.
I tried to make a better world out there, for magisters everywhere. To do so I aligned myself with Lord Tarbeck and we made a secret alliance with Cantor, and when you went up into the tower we let their forces in. It was supposed to be a simple coup, but Tarbeck betrayed me. And Cantor started laying siege to the capital while their splinter force went around the kingdom burning towns and villages. With Tarbeck's knowledge aiding them, there was little we could do to stop them. By the time I realized what was happening it was too late, the capital was overthrown and they slaughtered all the lords, and when they finished raping them they murdered the ladies too. I'm sorry Rugal. Your father Alden is dead.
Rugal then pulled out his blade and jabbed it through the stairs by Cameron's head. He was struggling to breathe properly now and said,
No, this is all a lie. It's a trick of the tower, you're not really here. This is just an illusion, a grand deception.
He didn't sound very assured of himself even as he spoke. Cameron too started to cry and said,
I am so sorry my prince. You would have made a wonderful king, perhaps, though it's not too late to undo what I have done. Up these stairs is the final floor, there are monsters up there though. Find the temple in the center of the ruined city, that's where you should find the wish.
Rugal pulled his blade up and held it over his head, ready to strike Cameron down. But his hands were shaking so much he couldn't do it. Instead, he snarled and raced up the stairs, Iris chasing after him.
Cameron, why did you do this? Because us magisters are treated like tools more than humans. We get taken from our homes and families the moment it's discovered we have magic potential. We don't get a choice, we either become soldiers or healers or whatever the king demands of us, and if we say no, they beat us until we say yes or die. I wanted to create a world where people like us can have the freedom to choose what we want to do with our gifts. I got you in time before you had to go through too much of that system. Vera, in the years we spent together I have come to love you like a daughter, you make me so proud at how far you have come, I only wish I could have done more for you.
Vera shook her head sobbing.
No, don't say that, I'm going to heal you up and then you'll be all better. Vera, listen to me carefully now, time is not on our side. You need to go help Rugal get to the temple and change things, get that wish and undo my mistakes. I won't leave you here to die. You don't understand, Thrain is coming, but he's been consumed by madness. And there is a strange power fueling him, I can't explain it, but somehow he's tapping into some ancient magic, not even I could beat him now. He will kill anyone who gets in his way, he can't tell the difference between friend or foe, so you must leave now before he gets here. Thrain? Wait, what about the others, are they also alive?
Cameron remained silent.
Cameron, please, they're my friends. I saw Garen, and the ranger, but I think Thrain killed her. Please hurry on now, the king is dead and only the prince remains. It's your responsibility to look after him, you're Grand Magister now. Rugal is your first and top priority, he needs your help, so go.
Vera whispered quietly one last thing in Cameron's ear before forcing herself to move on to the final floor. Chapter 31 Volga the Apprentice, Chapter 6
Look, we don't know who tipped them off, Edmund said. But Mavis warned us before the guards came busting down our door. We can't stay in Dorgal anymore. The council fears we will cause an insurrection.
Kira sighed deeply then asked,
and would that little news about the king's bloodline still being alive, would that have anything to do with the city folk and their sudden animosity? Maybe we were telling your friend the truth about that when the tower showed up. People were acting more angry towards the council and it's only gotten worse as the time's gone by.
At that moment Volga showed up with their bags, handing Kira's to her and asking,
"All right, we ready to go?"
Kira took her bag and stared at James and Edmund in cold silence for a minute before saying,
"Yeah, let's get the hell out of here before we get into trouble."
At the main gates to the city they found there was a strong formation of guards in full crimson plate armor, complete with heavy full-body shields and spears, standing before the closed gates.
"This doesn't look good,"
Kira said anxiously.
"No it doesn't, stand close to me in case I need to teleport us out of here,"
Volga said. As they approached, the guard captain rode up to them on his horse and Volga asked,
"What is going on here? Why are the gates closed?"
The guard looked down at them and addressed no one in particular while he said,
"By ordinance of the council, the city is undergone a temporary lockdown procedure. No one is allowed in or out without a voucher from the council."
Volga glared at the captain for a moment while he grabbed Kira and Edmund by the arm. He let go a moment later then asked,
"How long will this lockdown be for?"
The captain scoffed and said,
"Be gone with you, peasant."
Volga immediately backed away, apologizing sincerely. They got a good distance away from the gates before Volga answered their constant questions of what was going on.
"We have a serious problem,"
Volga said.
"The city is on lockdown." "No shit, stupid, we heard the captain back there,"
James said. Volga sighed irritated and said,
"I don't mean just the gates, I mean magic lockdown. The council has locked down all the magic in the city. I can't teleport us out."
Kira scoffed and said,
"Bullshit."
Volga glared at her while James and Edmund held their hands in front of them, staring down at them. Small white sparks of pure energy danced above their palms but died out quickly.
"Shit, he's right,"
Edmund said.
"We're struggling just to make this much."
Volga stared at the small sparks of energy crackling above their palms before Kira said,
"Well, we just need to find another way out of her, come on."
She led them off the main streets and through all the back roads and alleys she could. They found other smaller gates outside the city walls, but those too were locked up and well guarded. As they stared out of the alley at the last locked and guarded gate outside the city, the sounds of a marching patrol unit echoed in their ears. Suddenly Kira told them to get down, and despite Volga's protest, she pulled him down behind the empty crates with the others while the patrolmen passed by. While the others got back to their feet, Volga sat there staring at the wanted posters stuck to the wall, with the names and faces of James and Edmund.
"You fucking bastards!"
Volga said, rising to his feet and glaring at the two. Turning to Volga, and glancing past him, they saw the wanted posters and quickly tore them down.
"This is all because of you, isn't it? The reason you wanted to get out so fast, the reason the city's on lockdown, they're after you,"
Volga said, raising his voice in frustration. James and Edmund looked around, anxious some guards would hear them and capture them in that alley.
"Can you keep it down a little?"
James said frantically.
"Why should I?"
Volga half shouted.
"You two are wanted criminals." "Okay, yes, you're right,"
Edmund said in a hushed voice.
"We're wanted, but please can we go somewhere more private to talk, and explain ourselves?"
Volga turned to Kira and she had the same look of concern as the cousins. He crossed his arms and asked her,
"You know about this, didn't you?"
His tone not doing so well to hide the betrayal he felt.
"Volga,"
she started.
"I mean, yes, I knew about them, but I just found out recently, okay?"
After some silent debate, Volga said,
"We'll go to the inn and talk quietly in my room. But if I don't like your explanation, I'm selling you out, all three of you."
He glared at Kira when saying the last part. Back at the inn, Volga paced around the room listening to their explanation. When they finished, Volga asked,
"And the two council members you killed while in that gang?" "Mercenary group,"
Edmund corrected him.
"And we were deceived about that whole thing. They told us we were going on a bounty hunt, but after we killed them they later revealed they wanted to use us and our names to start gaining the support of the people and overthrow the council. And then return the royal family to power, with them of course as the sworn knights to the new kings. We don't even know the faces of the council men and women, they are to us, strangers,"
James said. The sudden loud sounds of screaming downstairs cut their conversations short. As they descended the stairs to see what the commotion was, the inn caught on fire.
Okay, time to get out of here,
Kira said frantically. James turned and went up the stairs shouting back down to them,
I get bags, meet you outside.
They quickly dashed out of the inn before the flames blocked the way. Getting outside they heard all the sounds of uproar and saw the people in the streets throwing rocks through any windows not yet smashed or lighting fire to random buildings.
What the hell is going on? The riots,
Edmund said.
We expected them at some point but not this soon.
James came rushing out of the building with both Volga and Kira's bags saying,
how about we distance ourselves from the burning building now?
They pushed through the bustling chaos in the streets as best they could, searching for somewhere safe to talk. In the mix of the rioters and crowded streets Volga sensed a dark force nearby, almost glaring at him. He turned his head and saw between the narrow openings of people were a small group of people in red cloaks. With their faces covered behind some dark veil, the red-cloaked people stood around with their heads in his direction, seemingly unfazed by all the people around shoving and shouting at each other. Something about them made his blood boil and he grit his teeth in anger and pushed down the anxiety welling inside him. And for a moment to him it felt as if all the chaos around disappeared, and alone he stood facing against an old yet familiar enemy, one he had battled with for generations. But the roars of the crowd erupted even louder than ever before and a warm splash of crimson blood hitting his face pulled him back to his reality. The city guards had come at last and they, being heavily outnumbered, didn't hold back in their violent bloodshed. The common folk soon began to retreat in a massive horde threatening to push Volga down and trample him to death. Ignoring his greater instinct to flee for a moment longer though, he looked back to where the red-cloaked group was but they were gone entirely, somehow despite everything else around he was relieved. But the wave of the violent crowd was soon to swallow him up and he had no way out, until a strong hand grabbed him by the back of his collar and pulled him into the alley. The same hand slapped him hard upside the head and as James took his side next to his brother Edmund said,
hey stupid, when we said to get away from the burning inn we meant also get out of the frenzied crowd.
His cheeks flustered a little embarrassed and Volga said,
I didn't mean to but there were these people who...
He stopped when he realized they weren't paying him much attention. He took a cloth from his pocket and wiped the blood off his face and neck and said,
the guards started killing the masses now instead of just trying to contain them, any ideas why? The mob started turning their attention towards the castle where the council members reside,
Kira said.
Sounds like some of the old loyalists making a move then,
Edmund said.
If they're going after the council,
Volga said, trailing off in thought for a moment.
Then this is great news. How is this good? It's all madness,
Kira said.
Wait, he's right,
Edmund said, figuring out Volga's plan.
The guards at the gates will rush to the castle after hearing this, at least the ones guarding the smaller gates. This is our chance to escape. Yeah, and how do you plan on getting to the nearest gate through all the rioting? The streets are flooded,
Kira asked condescending. James and Edmund smirked and James said,
we push our way through, and you two cling at our backs all the way.
Kira scoffed and rubbed at the back of her head looking out of the alley and into the streets where the mayhem was relentless. After a moment she said,
okay, let's go.
And true to their words, the cousins quite literally bull rushed their way through the streets heading towards the western small gate. Any man or woman that got in their way were shoved or thrown aside, sometimes they would push a few people and a small wave of them would fall. Along the way Kira and Volga were almost swept up in the chaos around them but managed to hang on long enough to make it to the, now unguarded, western gate. The area itself having little buildings around was relatively cleared aside from the few people cowering away from the rioting. They ignored them and Kira, seeing the big bars on the gate asked,
great, we're here now what? Stand back,
James said in answer as he and Edmund stepped up to the gates with their hands stretched out towards it. Their magic, a white stream of crackling energy, formed in front of their hands and combined they blasted a small hole through the gates, opening them wide. As Kira and Volga rushed outside the gates, the cousins staggered in their walk out of them. They slowed down to let James and Edmund catch up and the twins recovered faster the further out of the city they walked.
I can feel the anti-magic barrier weakening,
Volga said.
It must not stretch too far out of the city.
James and Edmund removed their hoods and pulled down the cloth covering below their eyes. They were rejoicing to be outside the city until the sounds of galloping horses roared behind them. They turned to see a dozen knights riding out on horses coming for them. They turned away and ran. The guards soon surrounded them though forcing them to halt, their spear tips pointing down at them, ready to be jabbed in their hearts at a moment's notice. One of the men, the one with a smug look on his face, said,
So these are the infamous cousins, the last remaining children of the formal royal bloodline.
As he boasted on about their capture and insulted them, Kira slowly and gently pulled the cousins closer to her and Volga. When they were close enough, Volga slowly grabbed the two by their arms, and while Kira had a firm grip on him, he instantly teleported them away from the city. They were still close enough to see the city, but far enough that it hardly mattered anymore.
That was far too close for comfort,
Volga said. Kira gave him a huge hug, and when she let go, James and Edmund patted him hard on the back, almost pushing him face first to the ground.
So where do we go from here?
Edmund asked.
Firstly, we keep walking and get to the next town to rest in,
Volga said as he began to walk from them. They followed right next to him.
Then you tell me if you will join my team or not. Join your team?
Edmund asked.
We don't even know what it is exactly you need of us.
Volga sighed in irritation and said,
the wishes come in the form of these insanely powerful gems, but they are encased inside a gigantic crystal. The crystal, called the Radox crystal, is very durable and takes a powerful magic to break. Normal weapons wouldn't even scratch it. I'm not strong enough to do it alone, but with our combined power we should be able to break the crystal open and get those gems. Hold up, how do you know all this?
James asked. Volga stopped walking and looked at the three of them. Kira too was curious about the source of his knowledge.
This is not the first time the tower has showed up, but it was so far back that only Dorgal has history books even mentioning it in legends.
The cousins looked at each other and James said,
okay, let's say all this is true and we believe you fully. What's to stop us from killing you after we break open that crystal thing and take the wishing gems for ourselves? Or Kira for that matter, you know she's the worst thief we ever met.
Kira scoffed, offended by him, and said,
hey, I've changed. Slightly. Besides, Volga's my friend, I'm not going to go stab him in the back after all he's done for me. And who says I would let you betray us either?
Volga chuckled in a dark sort of tone and started slowly backing away from them. When they were a good distance apart, he held his arms out slightly from his sides and said,
you want to know if you can kill me when the time comes I'm no longer needed? Well, go ahead, take your best shot. Come on, you have nothing to lose if I die. You're out of frame here and it's only us here.
Kira wanted to jump in and stop them, but she saw the determined look on Volga's face, and she knew if he was to be a leader, he had to establish he was in charge. The twins glanced at each other, then thrust out their hands as a small beam of white energy suddenly shot forth at Volga. The young magister disappeared in an instant before the beams hit him, and before the two knew it, he had grabbed them by the back of their necks. As the glowing red veins raced from the back of their necks over their faces, they struggled to keep standing. Then Volga let go of them and they gasped for air.
I might not have as much raw power as you,
Volga said,
or be as talented of a fighter as Kira, least not without my magic, but I know so many tricks and have been practicing them a lot recently. You think a dagger in the shadows, or a beam of destruction is enough to get me, then you're dead wrong.
They continued on after that, trailing behind Volga a little bit. When they finally came to the nearest inn on the main road, they rested there, sleeping late into the morning and even afternoon. It wasn't much of a surprise when Kira was the first to wake, the others were just exhausted from the long day. At breakfast, or lunch as that's what the inn was serving when they woke up, they talked about where to go next.
Alright, I think that I gave you two enough time to decide, so I have to know, are you joining me and Kira to the tower or not?
Volga asked the cousins.
We'll join, Edmund said, but we should learn to trust in one another, otherwise there will be serious problems later on. I trust that we will need each other to make it the crystal in the tower, and to destroy it. And one wish gem is enough for me. After I get that I'm more than content to let us go our separate ways if that's what's best. So, we cross that bridge when we come to it?
Edmund asked.
I don't see any other way really, do you?
The cousins sighed and James said,
we will join you, we owe you for helping us get out of the capital. Good, then we need to find some horses fast and travel to Cantor. We need warriors for our team.
James scoffed and asked,
and you want to go to Cantor for them?
He had to hold himself back from laughing. Volga scowled and asked,
yeah, what's wrong with that? Everything, Edmund snickered. The people of Cantor are shit, it's survival of the sleaziest there, and finding a worthwhile group of warriors in that slum kingdom is like trying to dig for water in the desert. Only exists if you know exactly where to look. Alright then,
Volga said, growing annoyed.
Where would you suggest looking for warriors, Evercane? That'd be our second choice, but a Latern is best.
Volga scoffed at the very mention of the kingdom.
They're right, you know,
Kira said, intervening.
We need warriors, and a Latern is the best place for them. The people may be ugly and barbaric, but they have more honor than most knights in Cantor, and are easier to persuade than those in Evercane.
Volga sat back in his chair and thought quietly to himself. He soon ordered the strongest drink the inn had and chugged it down, despite its foul taste to him, then said,
Well then, I guess it's to a Latern.